against potential enemies and under the permanent threat of war. Israel's wars come more often, but we all live in fortresses that we call states, and we all keep ourselves ready to fight the other states that fill the dangerous world beyond our borders. Kfar Giladi is in a particularly exposed part of Israel where the border makes a great curve. It's almost surrounded by enemies. On the north by the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, whose guerrillas occupy southern Lebanon, and across the valley to the east by the Syrians who wait in tanks beyond the Golan Heights. Yet, despite its precarious position, Kfar Giladi is a very peaceful place this cloudless morning early in June. The 400 members of the kibbutz have bought that peace with their lives. 40 of Kfar Giladi's members have died in Israel's 6 wars. And now, with the PLO sitting just across the border, they're paying for their security with constant watchfulness. The kibbutz is surrounded by 10 guard towers and 5 miles of barbed wire. Ori Eshkoli is the manager of Kfar Giladi. Ori is now 39. On his 18th birthday, like all young Israelis, he went into the army. His first war came in 1967, the Six-Day War. Ori's unit was the first to fight its way inside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, which had remained under Arab control since 1948. It was the fiercest fighting of the whole war. More than half of Israel's losses came in this single battle, but Uri survived untouched, and the city was taken. The Wailing Wall, the holiest place of the Jews, was once again in Jewish hands. Not only the city of Jerusalem was reunited by the Six-Day War, all of former Palestine, which had been divided between Arabs and Jews by the United Nations in 1948, was now under Israeli control. Israel's borders expanded enormously, and the hostile Arab armies around it were pushed back much farther away from heavily populated areas. But for the Palestinian Arabs, the Six-Day War was a disaster. Many of them, like the thousands who lived in this refugee camp near Jericho, had to flee the country altogether when Israeli troops seized the West Bank. The fate of the Jews in exile becomes the fate of the Palestinians. And for over 1 million Palestinian Arabs who stay behind in the occupied territories, all the future holds is permanent Israeli military rule. Most Palestinian Arabs have learned the same lesson from this miserable experience that the Jewish Zionists learned from their own people's long misery and exile, that without your own state and your own army, there can be no security, no possibility of controlling your own destiny. So a lot of recent Middle Eastern history has been taken up by the desperate attempts of the Palestinians to create their own state and army. It's in the nature of the system to force everybody to play the same game by the same ruthless rules. Not that even the Israelis, who are very good at the game, can win more than a temporary security from their military power. The destruction of 3 hijacked airliners on a disused airfield in Jordan in 1970 was one of the first signs that Palestinians themselves were starting to fight back. But the PLO was still too weak to strike at Israel. It concentrated mostly on easy targets outside Israel's borders, aiming for propaganda gains. The Palestinian guerrillas were still not the main threat to Israel's security. The real danger for Israel remained the regular armies of its Arab neighbors. Ali Eshkoli's second war came 2 years after his first. It was called the War of Attrition. His unit was pinned down by a heavy Egyptian artillery bombardment one day in 1969. A tiny piece of Egyptian shrapnel found its way into his spine. It took 6 hours to get him out to a hospital, and he will never walk again.
The human being is so flexible, so sometimes I forgot that I'm a war disabled, and I live my life quite normally. When I start to think over and all those things, it may hurt a little bit, but usually life go on. I go to work, I go to parties, I even dance sometimes, standing on a wall and lying on one of the girls that dance with me. Life goes on.
But the life that goes on is haunted always by the possibility of violence. For the settlements like Kfar Giladi up on the northern frontier, life became far more dangerous in the 70s as PLO guerrillas began to bombard them with Katyusha rockets from southern Lebanon and make raids across the border. The settlements had to turn themselves into fortified camps.
We are suffering from the problem of security, and Kfar Giladi was an open kibbutz like in all the villages all over the world. Today now it's a kind of a fortress. There is the fence all around the kibbutz. If the children want to go outside, they have to take with them one of the members with a gun. Some member who live here that must make guard. And of course the Katyusha attack. For example, the last year in 3 times, Kfar Giladi was hurt by Katyusha rocket.
At Kfar Giladi, the defenses are obvious: watchtowers and barbed wire. In most of the world, the boundary defenses are less visible, but we all live behind borders. For many of us, the border we defend is far away, and the main threat is from nuclear missiles, not guerrillas on foot. But the price of sovereignty is almost always blood in the end. The blood of other people's children and of your own. A small part of that price was